Muscle Music presents a nervous system revolution for artists, brought to you by Ruby Rose Fox. This podcast is for artists who struggle with their nervous systems. They might struggle from stage fright, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, so many things. So, for this podcast episode, I'm going to be sharing the introduction to my new book. And the reason I'm doing that is because I take the time to really ask why? How did we get in this situation? Why do we have the myth of the starving artist? How does that fit with the history of mental health? Why is the nervous system so foreign to us? Is nervous system work for the arts so new that it's just not hit the scene yet, or has the field been intentionally suppressed? Why haven't we unshamed our nervous systems if artists are already so connected to their bodies? These are the types of questions I was punished for in school. It was very hard for me to understand things, to buy into a process of learning without knowing why. Picasso said, "All children are born artists." And according to a study, they are not just artists, they are little geniuses. NASA conducted an experiment which reported that 98% of 5-year-old children were in the genius category of imagination. And that fell to 12% for 15-year-olds and 2% for full-grown adults. What the education system is doing to our brains, our sheer capacity to imagine, stay curious, and be creative, is shockingly damaging, to say the least. What's wild is that this study links genius straight to creativity, which apparently school is no good for. I will be asking you to be a part of a revolution. And yeah, I know everything is a damn revolution these days, but I actually mean it. I will demonstrate how creativity and genius have been historically linked to depression and mental illness, creating fear that prevents artists from fully embracing their creative power. To overcome this, we must engage in significant unlearning and unshaming. I don't just think, I know that it must be artists who will turn these big, toxic paradigms around. My job is to define a new reality for artists, one where they can thrive financially, change the world, and create incredible, expressive pieces of art. It's not too much to ask. First, we need to understand what we are working to overcome and how we got here in the first place. Conspiracy theories are usually not some grand plot. It's easy to want to believe that a big, evil higher force created a calculated plan, when it's very often just human incompetence, greed, and the ignorance of those in charge. So let's keep this in mind as we consider why fundamental information about our human biology, information that could boost resilience, improve health, reduce violence, and even save lives, has been excluded from schools, hospitals, educational programs, and especially from art, acting, and music schools. This is a working conspiracy theory, not pure truth, because we will never know what exactly happened, but boy, do I have some informed ideas. Moving forward, remember that the stories we create to make sense of our lives, whether true or not, need to be processed and then set aside to birth new stories and to create new realities. Let's leave the need to know why behind and create the world we want to see. And just because we have been victims of power doesn't mean we have to continue to be victimized. Many artists are just learning that we have 3 major nervous system states that radically shift our biology and behavior. But humans have known about the nervous system states for a long, long time. When I offer my clients information on the freeze response, the least understood nervous system defense state, they often say, "How have I not been taught about the freeze state like this? This would have saved me if I knew this 10 years ago." I usually point out the fact that PTSD wasn't officially included in the DSM, the psychiatric manual used to diagnose clinical mental illness, until the early 1980s because the military needed men to think that they were weak if they didn't want to go to war or if they defected. To make free as a pathology would threaten national security as it would dissuade men from enrolling. It means PTSD is only as old as me, and I only have a couple of gray hairs. This might be why none of your acting teachers know how to help you out of a freeze response. We are still afraid of this screaming trauma baby who's dying to grow up into intelligent nervous system theory for the everyday artist. But this isn't the whole story. Next, it was literally dangerous to mention mental illness as a woman in the mid 20th century. The government, mainly the CIA, had massively invested in the development of psychiatry, and there were a plethora of state run mental wards to fill. If you were an unhappy woman and your husband was ready to move on, you could easily find yourself locked up and medicated. Most women who were sexually abused and suffered from PTSD knew better and never spoke of it. It just wasn't safe to be out about your mental health struggles. Take your nervous system, what your creepy uncle did to it, shove it in the basement, and never talk about it again. Hearing these stories, you might think nervous system theory is new. Not even close. The nervous system states have been deeply studied for thousands of years, notably the 900-page encyclopedic tome by Richard Burton called The Anatomy of Melancholy, published in 1621, which discusses sadness, freeze, and shutdown, what we now call the dorsal vagal state. So, to say it's taken until the 2000s to get nervous system information to the public would be disingenuous. Of course, the Elizabethans used a different system, the humoral system, but these four humors align uncannily well with the polyvagal states we use today. Shakespeare deeply embedded nervous system states into his characters all the way down to the choices of his vowels. From Hamlet's dorsal vagal shutdown to Juliet's fight flight fiery use of consonants, her F's and her T's. The nervous system is so embedded in Shakespeare's work that if you want to study the nervous system, play with the language of his characters and you will feel the deep intelligence of the Elizabethans' understanding of the nervous system. As you will see, leadership requires a safe and social nervous system that can transcend and include what it cares for. In the humoral systems, good kings were thought of as quote unquote sanguine, or translated to what we know now, safe and social, and bad kings were choleric, fight or flight. So, in so much of Shakespeare, he presented us dysregulated kings like King Lear, Richard III, Macbeth, and saying, don't do this, because every dysregulated king topples everyone and everything under it when it falls. Unlike our healthcare system, the humoral system was preventative medicine based on regulating the body through something called quote unquote non naturals, which included treatments of diet, sleep, air quality, exercise, social interaction, music, and one no longer employed bloodletting. Humoral theory presents the idea that the body can cause mental anguish and that mental anguish can also cause pain to the body. The same afferent and efferent flow of information that's been presented by the polyvagal world as if it was mind-blowingly new, when this idea is as old as Galen. Burton also says that telling someone to just stop being melancholic would be the same as telling someone with a wound to stop their physical symptoms. Also, very much in alignment with how our medical professionals see trauma today. So, I'm going to say this conspiracy swiftly and then open myself up to a positive, gracious outlook to avoid looking back and turning into a pillar of salt. I believe we have removed this preventative care lineage to keep the American population as sick and disconnected and disengaged from democracy as possible. The overall sentiment is that our current democracy is run by a very small group of people who benefit from the culture at large being sick. And nervous system education would be so empowering. Consumers might start demanding services for preventative care, which is much less profitable. I now feel obliged to tell you how we got here because it has to do with the history of mental health in America. Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who created both mass produced therapy and consumer culture basically at the same time, didn't believe in democracy for all. He truly felt that a small group of elite should run society. Having a dumb, sedated consumer culture would make the job of his New York and European elite much easier. He even referred to his loyal family driver as Dumb Jack. I mention all of this because empowering this lowly class to understand their value would undermine the aristocratic stronghold. Of course, there are waves of enlightenment and darkness in this human experiment called civilization, but in terms of our own health and empowerment, it seems the 20th century was on the darker side of things. You want it darker? Here's a double whammy, which affects artists who often dare to unplug from this matrix esque hell of consumer comfort. Anyone who wants to leave the consumer rat race is quickly slapped in the face with the cult of the starving artist, just in case they should want to take their genius, aka their creativity, back and have power too. Let me explain. Aristotle posed the question, why are outstanding philosophers, artists, and poets often melancholic? This idea was elaborated upon in the late 15th century by Vinicio, who expressed the melancholic nature of artists. By the 16th century, it became fashionable to portray oneself as melancholic. Why? Well, Aristotle had alluded that melancholy may bring on genius. Portraits from this era often depicted courtiers reclining by a riverside underneath a tree dressed in black. Melancholy was seen as an attractive pose, and the idea that it might be linked to genius. Finicio built on this notion, and it was reflected in art such as Durer's famous engraving of Melancholia I. Basically, performing Melancholia was fashion. With insights from Northeastern researcher and professor Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on the performative nature of emotion, we now understand that if artists believe melancholy enhances their genius, it can lead them to frame their very normal pain and suffering as both madness and a gateway to brilliance, which is flat out dangerous to any human psyche. This belief fosters a modern stereotype of artists like Kurt Cobain or Amy Winehouse who might have received more support if the unconscious association of melancholy with genius didn't exist. So basically, this extremely dangerous stereotype has been perpetuated because artists think they will touch genius when the truth is that the dorsal defense system has enormously damaging effects to the human body, which include loss of feeling, loss of prefrontal cortex activity, loss of accurate hearing and perception, and so much more misery. There is no way to be a genius in the freeze state. I wrestled with why the myth of the starving artist was dominant in our culture, even though artists are totally capable of wealth, innovation, and health. Nothing else made sense until I stumbled on the work of Clotaire Rapet, a psychiatrist who played with the devil itself, the advertising industry, again handcrafted by Edward Bernays, using the brilliant work on subconscious desires of his uncle Freud. Rapet was hired to research which unconscious cultural codes could be exploited to sell products. Basically, to answer what are the unconscious associations driving the purchases of things like clothes, cars, and cigarettes. My mind exploded reading his findings because they were so dead on to my own subconscious assumptions. His code for work in America was identity. His code for sexuality was violence. The code for beauty was man's salvation. And for money, it was proof of goodness. Yep, that all tracked for me. So I used the same method to analyze what artists mean in the American cultural code. Artists, quote unquote, play. They don't work, which means in America, they don't have an identity. You can say, I'm a singer, but that will likely be met by working people with a smirk. Musicians play music, and actors are called players. In America, the words play have a pretty unscrupulous connotation. We get played. We play the lottery. We play poker. Playing is associated with the cultural code deception, recklessness, and luck, which is how many people see artists. Lazy people who can't get a real job and beg everyone to support their quote unquote work. No matter how hard you work as an artist, someone will always undermine your effort, attributing success to mere luck. That's why we love game shows that leave the success of a creative person up to voting. Good luck. It's easy to slip power and resources out of the hands of artists when they themselves unconsciously live with this cultural code too. All the artists I see thriving have fully leaned into the reality that a career in the arts is work, work, and more work, no matter how hard our culture gaslights that reality. This is why Spotify is king and why Live Nation is a monopoly. Why or how would this disempowerment benefit capitalism? Capitalism runs on creativity and demand. Wouldn't a slew of creative people be good? Wouldn't this help the aristocracy make more money through innovation? Wouldn't we want to honor their value to our society? Until I have a better theory, here's my thoughts on this. Economist Joseph Schumpeter was ahead of his time when he wrote an economic theory which predicted our boom and bust economies of today. And he coined the phrase creative destruction, which in Silicon Valley would just be simply that the economy is fueled by creative people who disrupt industries. You hear this word disruption used in any venture capital conference. In layman's terms, this is when creative people give no fucks and absolutely demolish older industries for new ones. The issue with creative people is that they actually take down enormous companies like Kodak that had to blow up their buildings and liquidate because of creative innovation. Disruption may fuel economies, but there are big, big, powerful people who don't want to see that happen. If every artist realized their power and if the science and arts were not so strategically separated, there would be a lot of disruption. To the wealthy elite, an artist that can harness science is dangerous. This lack of development of preventative mental health care and the Western lineage of the mentally ill artist are two behemoths that I will now try to take down with this literary slang. Firstly, we have absolutely suppressed nervous system knowledge, but we also have incredible new research that can massively change the lives of artists today. We must teach it and make it as fun and artful as possible. Second, we must unlearn the myth of the starving artist and teach artists that they can become luminaries, patrons of their own work if necessary, and are not relegated to deep mental illness because of their chosen profession. If we can shift this in the next decade, we will be busting open a stereotype that has disempowered artists since antiquity. Also, with the former information, we must encourage more creative types to venture into sciences, as any true artist knows that technology and math will in no way kill a creative mind or stop them from making art. I always tell my clients to choose a mission that is so big that it doesn't matter if you are liked or accepted by others. My mission is to create an enlightenment for the artistic nervous system to choose power and health over a misguided stereotype that has put thousands of artists in early graves. If we can turn this around, this movement would be a true enlightenment for artists not seen in thousands of years. And with the onslaught of AI, what better time to course correct this ancient misconception? What could our lives look like without the shackles of this dreaded, poor, disempowered stereotype? Why don't we know more about our nervous system as artists? Well, it's just knowledge that's not incorporated into artistic training. In the sports world, any coach who left out body strengthening would be considered terrible at their job and dangerous to the developing athlete. In the arts, however, educators don't think about strengthening the nervous system of their students. After all, the educators are not healers or therapists. They weren't trained to make nervous system strengthening recommendations. And indeed, like so many artists, they may struggle with mental health issues themselves and may actually believe in the myth of the starving artist. Nervous system training smacks of psychotherapy, and providing psychotherapy without a license is reckless and potentially damaging. I do not blame institutions for their current aversion to teaching about the nervous system. That said, nervous system education is something every single student should learn, not only for their own peak performance, but for the safety of others. Let me give you a quick example to illustrate the boundaries of this work. If I'm working with a little girl trying to sing, but struggling to match pitch, I'd likely recall that the inner ear shifts in fight or flight, which stifles the ability to match pitch. Without a basic understanding of the nervous system, I might assume I'm a bad teacher or that she lacks talent. So instead, I can use tools to anchor her nervous system in safety, tune her ears, and then get her singing. I'm not going to ask this child why she has anxious attachment with a parent or if she was molested or analyze her dreams. That is beyond my field. My field is equipping myself with a vast amount of nervous system knowledge to serve my clients and myself with as much understanding and flexibility as possible inside the craft of teaching and performing. The Fox theory combines two previously distinct disciplines, the autonomic nervous system health and stage performance, in the service of safety, but not at the expense of enjoyment and adventure. While polyvagal theory can be widely applied to many disciplines, the methodology in this book is specifically tailored for the performing artist who works with language and or music. Much of the acting work included in our certification program comes from the lineages of my teachers at Emerson College, from the traditions of Christian Linklater, Stella Adler, Konstantin Stanislavski, and many others. It also comes from my professional experience on theatrical stages as an actor and later as a singer-songwriter, band leader, and producer. The theoretical backbone of this work, its focus on how feelings of safety and danger change our nervous system and thus our emotional self-presentation, comes from polyvagal theory, invented and expounded by Professor Stephen Porges, amplified and explained by psychotherapist Deb Dana, and now applied by trauma specialists around the world. My thinking has also been significantly influenced by the foundational research into psychological trauma by Bessel van der Kolk, by the luminary work of The Physical Effects of Stress by Gabor Mate, by the internal family systems model of personality developed by Richard Schwartz, Deb Gruenfeld's work on power, Phil Stutz, and by the somatic experiencing method of healing devised by Peter Levine. Polyvagal theory has allowed me to enhance my performance work and my teaching, but it's important to note that I'm not a therapist. I'm a teaching musical artist who is a non-clinical nervous system expert, which is an entirely new field of practice. Indeed, the theory helps me better understand the line between teaching performance and doing therapy, which is important for any teacher who works in the realm of expression and emotion. As a nervous system pioneer creating new protocols and pedagogy for performers that, frankly, therapists are not credentialed to give advice around, I envision a future in which nervous system coaches can work alongside therapists to help professional performers live their healthiest lives. I'm excited to say that in the last few years, this reality has begun to come true. The stereotype of the brooding, unstable artist barely able to make ends meet bores me, and I hope it bores you too. Instead, I am interested in empowered artists who can communicate intelligently, directly, and vibrantly to their teachers, colleagues, managers, booking agents about the conditions that foster powerful, connected performances. I am interested in artistic leadership on and off stage. I'm interested in the messy, confusing, and thrilling challenge of integrating art and biology in the service of creating a safer performance environment. With all that pomp, conspiracy, and circumstance, I invite you to our certification program. Let's start very, very slowly, one foot in front of the other. Let's boldly step into this new era, armed with knowledge, compassion, and the unwavering belief that we deserve to live and create in a state of wholeness and joy. The revolution begins now, and it starts with you.